Once we've copied a question, we have all of the different fields and options for this question that we can modify as much or as little as we want. We're not going to get incredibly in depth with the code that controls how numbers and values are generated right now. We'll save that for some subsequent videos, and instead kind of talk in an overview about the information here and the types of things that we can change. The first is the description for the question. We have the option to include any information here that we want. If the original language is great, keep that. If you want to change it, you can change that. One thing to point out here, though, is that we can input mathematical expressions or make things render in a more mathematical expression form by using what's called the backtick. So it's this thing that kind of looks like an apostrophe. It's normally located next to the 1 on a full-size keyboard. But if we put any expressions inside that in our description, then when we view that information within MyOpenMath, that will be rendered in a more appropriate mathematical form. So if we had exponents and things like that, rather than reading that typed out, it would convert that to look like the expression x squared plus y. We have the option to change the use rights here, whether you keep that private, meaning only you can use this question. You can allow use by all, meaning other people can search and find your question in the libraries. And you can also give the option for others to be able to modify the question. I often start with private until I know that I've worked the bugs out of a problem, particularly had students in a class actually test it out, make sure that it's generating correct answers and assessing things correctly or evaluating things correctly. And then we could come back and allow use by all. If you allow modifications by others, it just means that someone else could come into your question and modify some portion of it versus having to copy their own question. So just up to you what makes the most sense there. You can also set the license for your question. The iMath AS community license is the one that's selected by default. And I would recommend, unless you have reasons for something more restrictive. You can also select the libraries that your question appears in. This is helpful for you and for others who are searching for questions if they narrow down their library search. For instance, this question is included in a few different places, but under arithmetic, basic statistics, mean, median, and mode. Since we're answering questions about the mean, that's an appropriate place where someone might look and search within that library to find this question. So selecting those appropriate library assignments can be helpful. We also have the option to select the question type, which is, again, something, features that we'll get into more in depth later, but depending on what students are answering, whether it's a number, a mathematical expression, creating a graph, there are different features we need to set here. There's a lot of documentation on how to create these questions by clicking on the Writing Questions help. This is a very lengthy document. The more time you spend with it, the more proficient you'll become with this material. And in later videos, we'll talk about more of these commands in depth. And there's also a macro library help. These are additional commands that you can call on. For instance, there is a stats library. So additional commands like calculating the mean of a data set, if you need that for particular questions. In the common control, this is where numbers and values are being generated. There is a lot of code to get familiar with here, but again, later videos will detail this more, and the more time you spend with this, the more comfortable you'll become with it. But we could see a relatively easy piece of code here is that this person created a variable called mean, so that $sign indicates this is a variable, and their value for the mean is selected from this list of predetermined numbers. There are a lot of different ways to generate random values. They went with a very specified list. If you were copying this question for your purposes, something you might consider is changing those to numbers that are in the 20s or hundreds or thousands, just depending on what the context of the problem is that you're trying to create. Skipping ahead, because again, we'll get more in depth with those commands and features later on. The next box we'll find is the question text box. The way this view is set up right now, I see kind of these standard word processing tools here. If that's not there, for instance, as we see right here, we can click this toggle editor button and it switches us back and forth between an HTML view and a more text editor friendly view. This is where we write all of the information that a student would actually see. So this is the actual question text a student would see. Anywhere we see an expression with that $sign, that's a variable that's being dropped in, or here we have an answer box is being inserted into the question. That's where students would actually enter their answers to the question being posed. And then there are some additional options like adding a detailed solution, uploading image files, including a help button with a link to different URLs. So if there's a YouTube video or a textbook section you want to link to, there are ways to add those help features to questions as well. If you are revising a question, you have the option to click Quick Save and Preview. This will just let you see the updated version of this question as you're creating it, allows you to test it by entering in possible answers, verifying that your calculations are correct, the right answer is being calculated in the problem, and that when you enter the right answer in that field, it's being accepted. So in this case, 1.4 is being accepted as the correct answer for this iteration of the problem. Once you've got all those kinks worked out the best you think you can, then go ahead and click Save, and you'll have the option to add that question to your assessment. In this case, I had originally used the template option, so note that the original question is still in my assessment. If I want to remove that or keep that, that's just another choice that we need to make.